I wish I could remember exactly when I shifted from Maria Elena to Brazil, because the version of Brazil that then took over from this very beautiful lilting guitar solo was Brazil by Jeff Moldar, and it's the one that's used when Jonathan is driving along in his little Messerschmitt, and it's a very silly version of Brazil with burping and lots of funny noises in it, but it was one that always made me laugh.
I went to discuss this great history of the making of the country Brazil, only to find out that it was about that song. And when Gilliam said, no, it's about the song, it's not a history of Brazil, it has nothing to do with Brazil, it's the song Brazil. I went, you mean dum bam 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 bam, the bar mitzvah tune, I think is what I called it. And he said, yeah. And I actually tried to convince him to use a better piece of music. I said, you don't want to base an entire film on that song. Have you shot it yet? No. And we spoke about it for a long time and had funny conversations. You know, he was saying, what do you think? Do you think music can be funny? I remember saying, I guess music is funny. He said, well, I need it bittersweet. And I said, well, I'm good at bittersweet. I do bittersweet very well. And that was about it for a little while. And then he called me in to view a cut of Brazil. I think it was about 6 hours long when I first saw it. And it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. I realized I was in good company. I was in the presence of a master. And this film was about something. And I was going to say yes to whatever it was he wanted me to do, including using the song, the tacky bar mitzvah song, which I eventually fell in love with to the extent that I felt that I'd written it. I did suggest that he listen to the Luis Bonfa songs for Black Orpheus and just acquaint himself with the brilliant music of Villalobos, other great Brazilian music. But there was no swaying him. And on a particular evening, he and I drove up in one of his funny cars to George Harrison's house for an evening's party. And as we were driving up to Henley, it's a very beautiful countryside, I brought a tape for him to listen to of Ein Heldenleben, a Richard Strauss piece that I knew really well from playing oboe in a Juilliard. It's about an hour's drive into the countryside, and it was sunset. And the sun was obliging us with the most incredible display as Strauss's music was playing. And we knew we were onto something. It was as if the gods were speaking to us. So at the end of the day, I did base a lot of the score on that kind of ethic, the ethic of Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, and was determined to write very fanciful, very heroic violin solos, which is what Ein Heldenleben features. We had a fiddle player in the orchestra who was the leader of the orchestra, named Sid Sachs. And he's a lovely guy, but is not a very good player, not at that time anyway. And I tried really hard to get other soloists to come in and be the soloist in order to prevent him from playing the solos. And I failed. I was trying to get Pinkas Zuckerman, who was a good friend, and other soloists to come in, but I failed, and Sid Sachs wound up playing the solos. And in retrospect, it was great, because he is playing fairly pathetic, yet heroic violin against the huge orchestral background. And that's absolutely right for Sam's character in the movie. A lot of filmmakers can't cut without music. Julian and Terry did. They chose very sparingly, often the same cue. There were a lot of Strauss waltzes that would turn up, because Gilliam has a fascination for Strauss waltzes. There were bits and pieces of a ballet score that I had handed him as a sort of a demo of my work. There was a little piece of music from The Dead Zone, a film that I had recently completed. And he liked that bit, and I eventually incorporated a bit very much like it in the final work. Whenever I could, I made music out of the song. The song Brazil became the basis for a lot of cues, to the extent that because I didn't actually write it, I only thought I had, we had to make arrangements with the publisher of that song. And there were many examples where I thought I had borrowed from the song, and I had to redline those bits of the score because that technically didn't belong to me, that belonged to them. And I submit that at the end of the day, and they had a team of musicologists working on the score in order to assign the copyright holder the right share of the royalties or whatever they were. And I was surprised because they credited me with a lot more original music than I credited myself with. I thought that I had borrowed freely, and they couldn't determine any relationship with what I had done to the song in many cases. I mean, some were very obvious, but I guess I got away with murder. A lot of the time, my tongue was firmly in my cheek, and I remembered a piece of music from my youth, which I think was Leroy Anderson or maybe Maxwell Anderson. Anyway, it was a piece called The Typewriter, and it used the typewriter with the symphony orchestra. So I had the typewriter beating the rhythm of ding, 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 and I made the whole cue based on that thing. And I said, oh, that's funny. I worked with Terry and with Ray Cooper, practically living in my back pocket the entire time we were working on the score, and they kept urging me further and further. There were some cues that were written 3 and 4 and 5 times, and in those days I was doing all my own orchestrating. It would be a flurry of pages and discard them and do it all again. There were no constraints. Ray Cooper was a genius, still is, I suspect, at helping to guide me through the uses of the theme. This bit of the theme is for this character, this bit of the theme is for that mood, and it all made great sense at the time. But it was a fairly painstaking process of trial and error and elimination and attempts that went wrong and doing it again. And it was a great working process that, you know, normally a film score takes, well, it should take 8 weeks, but normally it takes 2 weeks. And we worked on that film for about 6 months. I didn't ever try to set it in any particular period. I mean, we used big orchestras, I used kazoos, I used 1,000 people singing, I used one guy singing, I used a solo cello. It was mostly about the land of creativity, because the land that he had to depict was the land with creativity been killed, creativity been stifled. And so we could best show that by being as creative as we are able to be.